What's up guys, it's Louis here, hope you're doing great. In this video I'm going to talk about why I completely avoid buying properties on auction in South Africa. I'm going to talk about the 3 different types of auctions we get in South Africa. I'm also going to share why I specifically avoid auctions. I'm going to share some of the advantages as well as the disadvantages, and at the end I'm going to share a couple of tips that you can implement if you ever want to buy a property on an auction. With that said, there's 3 types of auctions we get in South Africa, and the first one is a voluntary auction. This is where a seller of a property freely lists his or her property on an auction, hoping to get the highest bid possible. This is where someone might have a property on the market for quite a while and it's not getting the price it deserves. They can try to put it on an auction to receive a higher bid, knowing that there will be serious buyers at the auction. The second auction is a bank auction, and this is definitely a more common type of auction, and this is simply where the bank has mandated the sale of a property of a person that is in arrears with his or her bond. The advantage of a bank auction is that it has full transparency, and one of the main things that I like about a bank auction is that if you win the highest bid, the rates and taxes or the outstanding levies of that property will be covered by the bank specifically. So you only have to account for the normal purchase price of the property like you would in a normal sale. It's definitely possible to pick up a property for a bargain price with bank mandated auctions, but at the end of the day, the bank needs to make sure that it can recover all of its money. Then the third type of auction is known as a sheriff auction, and this is where the bank is unable to recover the funds from the current bond holder. Then instead it applies to the court to auction the property on a sheriff's auction. This is usually where you can find the best bargains. Unfortunately, one of the issues that might arise is that you as the buyer will have to pay for the outstanding rates as well as the outstanding levies. This can be quite a large amount, because if you think of it, one of the first things that someone stops paying when they can't afford their home or their bond repayment, first they'll stop paying their levies, then they'll stop paying their rates and taxes, and then they'll stop paying the bank. So just imagine the amount of money outstanding on their levies and rates and taxes. Obviously, there is advantages when it comes to buying a property on an auction. In my opinion, the main advantage of buying a property on an auction is that you can buy a property for a bargain price. You can pick up a property for a very attractive price if you are lucky. This is probably one of the biggest advantages when it comes to property auctions. Another advantage might be something as simple as there's no transfer duty involved. Another advantage might be the quick sale process, but again, it really depends on the exact situation. Then some of the disadvantages is that the property will still be sold footstewards. Footstewards basically means that you buy it as it is, with its issues, with its arrears, and whatever it might be, you buy the property as is. This is generally how all second-hand properties are sold, so it isn't necessarily an issue, but the issue might be when buying a property on an auction, you don't necessarily have the transparency that you would have when buying a property through, let's say, an agent. You can obviously go and inspect the property, add inspection clauses, and make sure that you know exactly what you are buying. That brings us to the second disadvantage of auction properties, is the limitation of viewings. Obviously, you will be able in most cases to view the property that you want to bid on. This will be your only chance to make sure that you understand exactly what you are buying, and it's vital to inspect the property in such a way that you can account for all the repairs and maintenance needed. Another disadvantage is that that property is probably occupied by the current owners. Often the owners live in the property and they are the ones that can't make the payments anymore, and they obviously live there for free if you think of it, so it might be an issue to eventually evict those owners or even tenants. So it's important to account for the eviction process depending on the exact situation. Think of why people are selling their properties on an auction, and most of the time it's not a voluntary auction but a bank mandated or a sheriff's auction, so the people living there is definitely going through some financial hardship. And when people overall are placed in these situations, they don't think rationally and they can be difficult to eventually get out of the property. Another disadvantage that you can't include conditional sales or any clauses in most situations. This means that you can't add the clause of selling your own property before buying this property, or for example adding suspensive clauses to the contract like doing inspections, using your own attorney, maybe making sure that you get 100% finance. So it's difficult because you can't really negotiate too much. Then another disadvantage is the upfront cost when buying on an auction. Most of the time the buyer will have to pay the commission for the sheriff, which is usually around 10% of the purchase price. The last disadvantage is that there is reserve prices on these properties. So they won't actually sell the property unless they reach the minimum reserve price, which is usually a market related price on these properties. So yes, you can get a bargain, but you won't be able to buy a property for like 50% of what it's actually worth because of these reserve prices. So the reason I am making this video is to share my opinion and why I personally avoid these auctions. And the first reason is there's so many deals available if you know where to look. So it's not necessary for me to look for bargains on auctions. Another reason is that the type of properties that usually get sold on auctions is not the type of properties that I am looking for. Most of the time it's people that live in the property themselves who overextended themselves financially and eventually couldn't afford the property anymore. This is usually fancy townhouses or any type of property that is used as a primary residence. This isn't necessarily my investment strategy, but it might be yours, so it can be a good option for you. And investment properties very seldom get sold on auctions, especially if it's actually a good investment. Another important reason is I always add many clauses to my contract, like inspection clauses, financing clauses, stuff like getting access to levy rolls or financial statements of a body corporate, or stuff like only registering the property in 3 months time. I use leverage for all of my properties, so I don't want to use any of my own cash, and when paying for a sheriff's commission, that is money that you have to put down on your own. So with all of that out of the way, if you are considering buying a property on an auction, there's nothing wrong with it, and I still believe that you can find good deals on these auctions. So here's a couple of tips that you can consider before you go ahead and make your first bid. The first tip is to ensure that you can finance the property that you are bidding on. If you can only afford a property of 800,000 Rand, it doesn't help you are bidding at 1.5 million if you know you can't afford or finance that property. So that brings us to the second tip, which is to get pre-approved. Get pre-approved and know what is your maximum bidding amount so that you don't waste your own or anyone else's time. If you go to a physical auction, make sure that you arrive early. This just gives you time to settle in and to get into the right mindset before the auction starts. Then another tip is to do your research as far as you possibly can. If you know the area the property is listed in, make sure you draw lightstone reports about that specific area. Do your general research like you normally would before buying a property to understand that specific suburb or the general market area. If you have the address of the property and you were able to view that property, you need to draw TPN reports to make sure that you know the minimum value of that property. Another tip is to simply attend other property auctions as an observer so that you can see how the whole process works and to get used to what is happening at that auction. This is a great way to get some experience so that you don't make stupid mistakes when you eventually want to bid on an auction. Then another very important one is to check the conditions of the sale. There might be stuff like this sale is conditional upon the purchaser paying interest for this bid up until the property is transferred into their own name. This means that you might have to pay interest on your bidding price up until the property is actually transferred. So make sure that you check the condition of the sale, because there might be a few small things that a lot of people miss. Then lastly, check for a lease agreement. Check whether this property is being rented out, because remember, huurgeld voorkoop is a real thing, and if you buy this property and there's a legal lease agreement, you can't just evict the tenants because you want to. You need to make sure that you follow the legal steps before you can actually evict these tenants. Whether they are paying or not, this is not an easy process, and it can either be very simple or very difficult. With that said, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you are someone that has more knowledge about auctions, please feel free to comment down below. If there's anything that you want to add on this video, again, feel free to comment. I love it when you guys add value to the comments. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.